welcome to We're Not Wizards. We are the best, but not wizards. Enjoy the show!
Welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I'll be your host for April. It's here. We've had our little clock jumpy thing going on, which means it's like when you go outside at night, it's all brighter and the sun's coming out. And I've been told twice I need to cut the grass, but it's a jungle, so I don't want to affect the ecosystem. So I'm trying to get away with it as much as possible. But I did discover that if you are interested in a new lawnmower, that Homebase are doing them really, really cheaply. I mean, I got, like last year, they were really expensive. They were about almost like £200 for a decent one. But Homebase have got a 15% off sale. We're not sponsored by them. But I did get a really, really good top of the range like lawnmower for about 130 quid. So I was quite pleased with that. And
okay,
it's raining today.
Just Richard, right. Hello.
Yeah.
Right. Petrol or electric?
It's electric.
Okay. Cord or battery?
It's a cord.
Okay, adjustable height or single height?
You can adjust it. You need to do a bit of screwing around and stuff like that, but you can definitely adjust it. It's got a double-handled thing as well on it. It's got the handles kind of sticking up as well.
Okay.
So you can actually, you're not having to do the steering where you've got the awkward, you know what it's like. You've got the steering kind of that way, which is difficult. You've kind of got the handles like this, which is kind of better. Anyway, that's beside the point. April's here, sun's out. That is the voice of Mr. Sam Turner from the Staying In podcast.
Sorry,
I've
you
yet
got
to
onto
bring
one of
in
my hot topics straight away.
extra special, an extra special guest. The title of this episode is going to be called Staying In and Taking the Hiss, because from Steamforged Games he's a repeat offender. And that doesn't mean he's doubly offensive. It just means he's here again. I've got Sherwin Matthews. Hello.
Hello, everybody. And you should probably stress that other fine lawnmower purveyors are available.
Yes, absolutely.
Why? I'm not here to. I mean, what does it matter? If Homebase contact me, what B&Q gonna? B&Q don't contact me. They're not going to contact me and say, listen. You know, I went into Homebase, it's local. I went to B&Q, it's like you have to go further along the road. You have to go to the big police station roundabout, and it's called the police station roundabout because that's where the big police station is. And then B&Q's a further bit along. But I decided to go Homebase. But there are other places you can buy kind of lawnmowers from.
I mean, I guess when you are carrying a lawnmower, it's kind of heavy. So duration of how far you have to travel is kind of important.
True.
It is that, and also it's the fact that I think Homebase have always done me quite well on a price. I think I've always walked into B&Q and went, oh, they're a bit more. That's a bit more pricey than what I kind of expect. So before we begin, let's introduce the sponsor for this show is Homebase. Bringing your garden and DIY supplies. No, that's not true. That's not true at all. Last time we spoke, I mean, I don't even want to think about the last time me and Sam spoke. It was, it's far too long. On podcast, I mean, we speak to each other kind of on a regular basis because we kind of know each other. And Sherwin, we spoke a couple of months ago when we were right in the middle of kind of like Elden Ring extravaganza. The reason that Sam is here is because me and Sam are fans of some of the games that Sherwin's done.
Yeah.
And he thought it'd be a really, really good idea to get Sherwin on because he's quite intimidating and scary. So I thought if I was going to tackle him, we'd do like a good cop kind of bad cop kind of thing. So that's what I was thinking. Are you up for that, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as I can be good cop.
Is that okay? I'll be the bad cop then.
Okay.
Okay, Sherwin, where were you last Tuesday night around about 7 o'clock?
Last night around, I think I was playing D&D.
Oh wow.
I think.
Okay.
I think around about then. That's Tuesday group. Yeah, that's about right.
Is that a regular kind of campaign thing that you're doing then?
Yeah, I play some form of RPG about 4 nights a week. So
Wow.
I've starting in lockdown.
Oh.
I managed to find myself in about 4 different groups, during the week because what else are we going to do when we're all locked away? And yeah, basically that just kind of carried on going. So.
And is it different? Do you play like a continual campaign, and have you got different other campaigns that you run into, or do you have a night where you're like kind of like, well, let's just do homebrew stuff, kind of thing, or does it?
So that's 4 different groups. It should be stressed.
Wow.
So one of them is a D&D group. One of them is a Delta Green group. One of them is used to be Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, but I think is going to transition back into D&D.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one, we kind of just pick up whatever, and that can be something homebrew that we come up with, or testing, or whatever. It can be, hey, let's just try a brand new system we've not tried, or an old one that we remember. So Blades in the Dark has been one of those, for example. And we sort of bounced around through various different ones.
So, with you working in the industry, is you being kind of doing this as a hobby, as a regular thing? Is that just part and parcel? Are you literally sitting kind of like, do you wake up in the morning and you're kind of like, oh, gotta go and do work again and kind of like make games for people, and then, oh, I've got to like do some D&D tonight? It's like, does it,
I've been a tabletop geek since probably about age 7 or 8.
Okay.
And I think since then, since I started working for Steamforged, I don't think I've actually stopped, perhaps a better way to say, I don't think I've ever started work as much as just being having fun and living my best life is the best way of saying it. So I'm lucky enough to have one of those very strange jobs where it doesn't really feel like a job, because I just get to do really fun stuff, which is really nice.
So how did you cut? What were you cutting your teeth on at the age of like 7, 8, and 9 then?
Do you know what? I'm going to grab something from up the top of my desk and show you guys, which is obviously fantastic podcast material. 1,000 years ago, when I was young, I got dragged off to a car boot sale.
Yeah.
And as we have these terribly British things, and quite whilst being bored out of my mind, I wandered around, and then I found this book.
Okay.
Wow.
Just sitting there, waiting for me, which for those of you who can't see because you're listening to this as a podcast,
Yes,
is an original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. And I probably bought this for about tuppence. I honestly can't remember how much I paid for it, but I picked it up and then desperately tried to understand the contents of it, which when you have no actual main rulebook or anything else is impossibly hard, because I was also like 7. So I have no hope in context of understanding what the book was. But it didn't stop me going back to it time and time again until eventually, at some point, a couple of years later, these nice people introduced this game called Hero Quest.
Wow.
And that I fell in love with immediately the Christmas that my cousins and my long-suffering uncle sat down to try and talk us through it and play. And that persisted, and that kept on going. And then from that fell out Warhammer, and then I had it's like I leveled up a little bit more. I could understand a little bit more of the Dungeon Master's Guide at that point.
Yeah.
And then I kept on learning, and I kept on playing games, and I could learn a little bit more. And then around about age 12, I said in my very squeaky voice, which was starting to get a bit more gravelly then, I have mastered life. I now understand this book. I'm ready to go forth and play Dungeons and Dragons.
I just had this vision of you going about being 7 years old, still rocking the beard. If I'm being perfectly honest.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. Still had a beanie, still had the sleeve. Still what it was. So at that point, I felt like I had mastered it, and then went out. And apart from reading a whole bunch at that point, I'd fallen very much deep in the well of reading a whole bunch of fantasy literature at that stage, and playing a lot of Warhammer, and just went from there really. And I think my role-playing career was slightly stymied by the fact that I couldn't find anybody else to play with at the time. But Warhammer was at least easier. And then it wasn't until I got sort of late teens that I managed to find a regular group, and then went from there.
I was a Hero Quest kid. Well, not a Hero Quest kid. I think it was about 13 or 14 when Hero Quest kind of came out. What about you, Sam? Were you Did you get to play Hero Quest as well?
No, I never got to play Hero Quest. When I was growing up, the game in our house was Upwards, which is a Scrabble variant where you can build the words up as well as along and down. And that was about it. Like, I'm a pretty... I'm the poster child of a late bloomer. And really, I only played my first quote-unquote brackets modern board game or even tabletop game back in 2014, 2015, something like that. So, yeah, I've had a lot of catching up to do.
It's around about the start of the golden era of Kickstarter, that, isn't it?
Yeah. And yeah, like and even doing like things like RPGs has been a recent sort of thing for me. Like we started off getting into things like 10 Candles and Dread and doing some Dungeons and Dragons things, and then obviously doing Blades in the Dark. I played Traveller for the first time at AirCon recently for a couple of hours, and that was absolutely, that's a bonkers.
I'm glad you used that word. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. That's a bonkers RPG. But for me, like that whole like how has it changed for you then, Sherwin? Because like that book that you held up is written by Gary Gygax, and like so that's almost from day dot of being immersed in this hobby, and then since it's had this like, I don't know if revival is the right word, maybe resurgence. Like I've been hearing things like, that new Dungeons and Dragons movie, it's actually meant to be pretty good. And like there seems to be just a lot more of an understanding of like what that part of the hobby is, and like sort of the way of getting into it is a lot easier. Like how have you seen it change over, since you were in the single digits to now?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because the obvious thing that I would say is, being a tabletop geek, I'm not going to say we're cool,
no,
but I am going to say we're a lot cooler. We're a lot cooler than we used to be.
Yeah.
Like if I go back to secondary school, I was one of the unfortunately I was one of the bullied kids. I was one of the quiet ones that no one really talked too much.
So I think you're right, because I think depending on when you got into it. If you're like looking at getting into kind of D&D now, I mean, everybody's kind of shouting about Stranger Things and stuff like that. And like everybody's kind of going crazy for Eddie and Stranger Things. And literally, I knew guys like Eddie and Stranger Things when I was at high school, and they just did not have the best time at high school. Whereas you kind of look at it now and they're like, everybody's going, yeah, Eddie forever, are we bringing him back and stuff like that? And I'm just like going, what kind of parallel world or dimension have we entered into, kind of thing? Yeah,
kind of. Like, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? I can obviously only speak for people in the UK and obviously very specifically my experience, but I wasn't terribly popular at school, and what I did was, I play with toy soldiers. That was something where my peers didn't endear me to my peers. But when you kind of would have one of them who isn't part of the mob mentality would sit down with you, they go, actually, what you're doing is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But don't tell anyone I said that, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then basically as time went on, it's just, there's various different touch points we've had, whether you look at something like Big Bang Theory or whether Stranger Things or whatever else, geeks have slowly become more of a presence. And that has meant that, I'd like to hope that, the guys playing it, the people playing it at schools are no longer the bully kids. They're actually having fun, or people are talking to them more, or that's just more of a legitimized hobby. I mean, obviously, aside from that, the other thing is it's much more accessible now. Like I remember also being being the angsty teen that I was, listening to a whole bunch of very loud, very abrasive music when I was young, because that's what metal was, and you couldn't find it anywhere. Like, to go get this music, there was no radio station, there was no internet at that point, because I'm old. It was something where you'd have to go on a pilgrimage somewhere into
to the big city,
into London.
Yeah.
And and then go to shows and travel around being sort of a dirty little club mutant and basically find that stuff out. And the point is that that's kind of what it was, and there was no awareness of it. Whereas now, if you want to listen to that, Spotify will just throw it at you. It's in movie soundtracks, it's everywhere, and it's the same with D&D. It's the same with board games. The resurgence is real, as in the sense that you can buy them in Waterstones, foils, various other different places now. It's in mainstream brand shops. My mind was blown. When I went into the game in the town where I live, and there's a game that I made sitting on the shelf looking back at me.
Wow.
It's kind of it's complete imposter syndrome. Just opened up a hole and swallowed me up whole. I was kind of, how is this a thing? Like people are walking around. Even one guy was even buying it. I was almost like, no, I shouldn't mention anything to you, but that's kind of weird.
Pull the Sharpie out. Would you mind?
Let me write on your box. Yes. No, so that sort of stuff is a very big shift, because previously, I think a lot of people had heard of something like Games Workshop, which is the obvious one. It has a lot of high street presence.
Yeah.
But no one had an awareness of what that was. Whereas now, that's video games. That's people are talking about TV shows, movies, and stuff. You have Henry Cavill, who will just turn up everywhere and talk about how he likes Space Marines. There's various different things. There's a greater growing awareness of it, and it's almost legitimized it.
I mean, at some point, I am gonna pluck up the courage to ask Henry Cavill on the podcast, and then I'm just gonna sit there and melt for like an hour and a half or whatever while he's kind of talking to me. But is it? I mean, if it, just to be perfectly honest, if I had been the person buying the game, I would have given you the Sharpie to kind of sign it. To be perfectly honest,
you didn't know who I was, though. To be fair,
but I mean,
I'm just some random dude with a sleeve and long hair. What does he know?
I don't know, but if you came up and says I designed that, I'd kind of be tempted to say, "Well, go and sign it anyway, just in case." Because even if you're lying, then I've got like a kind of a sign box, which is kind of fine. But talking about the design side of things, because this is going to sound how am I going to say this without sounding like I'm sitting in the HMS sycophantic, sailing towards the kind of the compliment iceberg, saying she's going to go down.
How do you make
Captain.
the good games?
No, it's not that. But okay,
Tremendous.
what I'm saying is, right. What, and you've put me at the side, Mr. Turner. We're going to be having words in the car after this. With other people designing games, right? Okay, I want to design a game about making a cup of coffee. So I go ahead and I make a game about designing a cup of coffee, and I make my cards.
Like?
And I make my card. Okay, so it is. And people do this
Bear
to
in
me all the
mind
time. And I always
bear in mind that this game exists and I played it and it's actually very good. But go on.
Right. Okay.
Okay, sounds fantastic.
Okay.
I'm interested.
Okay.
Let's
So
see how
it's a
close you
game
get
based.
to the actual design.
It's a game based around coffee orders,
Okay.
and you're
You like coffee, Mama?
you're juggling. Well, you're kind of juggling resources based on time,
Okay.
because basically you've got on each of the cards there's basically an indicator of time. So in the top corner of the card it will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's an indicator of time. Now you've got options on how fancy you make the coffee, but obviously certain customers you'll lessen the number of customers that will want that particular type of coffee from you because it takes more time and there's a chance it's going to get cold. So you've got to balance up putting together the special ingredients that will get you more money and gain you towards being a run-of-the-mill coffee service to being something which is a bit more kind of fancy, and you're able to charge more prices. So it's a balance between those kind of resources. So when somebody comes in, you play from a hand of cards, whether you're going to have like 2 shots of espresso, which might be just like a 1, whereas if you're wanting to do like a fancy kind of caramel frappuccino, that might be a 3, but it might obviously, you're able to charge more for that. But you've got a certain amount of time that you've got to use for your resources. And that's kind of it. What I'm saying, right, is that nobody's going to come to me and say, you're doing this cup of coffee game wrong. Whereas in the games that you've created, with the like say your Resident Evils, your Resident Evil 3, Elden Ring, and obviously moving on to Sea of Thieves as well, there is somebody there who is instantly going to be a critic for you. How do you deal with that? Do you just let it wash over you, or do you keep an eye out just in case people come up with kind of valid critiques and criticism that you can then bring into a future version or bring into an expansion or something like that?
I want to come back to that in the second or third hour of this podcast, because right now I'm thinking about your coffee game. So you could use the customers as a timer deck. So you could have like a timer deck across the top of your dashboard, right? And you've got your people, and they basically slot into that.
Yeah.
And at the end of every round, they kind of move once. Imagine that like as a row of cards going from left to right, and they basically move down.
Yeah.
And effectively, what you're trying to do is get their drink to them before they get to the end, or otherwise they lose interest and leave.
Basically.
So and on your side of the dashboard, I imagine this is kind of a solo experience, but you could do it with multiple players if you want. And you're spending your actions to effectively, let's say, like you've got the sort of the milk jug or whatever, that starts off with a number of tokens on it, and as you use it to make your different coffees, you're discarding tokens. So one of your actions might be replenish that, but obviously when you're doing that, you're not then making coffee.
Yes.
So you're trying to efficiently move around and do those sort of things. And then you could play bonus cards from your hands to like add cinnamon to the top if someone has a chai latte, for example, and that sort of stuff, which gets you more points. It's like a multiplier.
But it takes longer to make. So therefore, you've got the danger of, you've got the danger as you could basically make a couple of drinks and have it, and people are moving down, but you've got to make sure that somebody that's ordering the more expensive drink is further up the track. So by the time you've got that drink made for them, they're still on the track and have not disappeared. Now, the way that it would work is that whether it's 2 players or 3 players, you've got a finite number of customers, which are slightly more cards than the actual people, but everybody has a track of maybe like six to 8 spaces, and the customers actually move round everybody's kind of cafe, kind of searching for the best
so like a
one.
sushi belt of consumers.
Pretty much like a sushi belt of customers like that. And basically then if you manage to then win that customer, you claim them and they have a points value as well. And then you deal another card which goes onto the conveyor belt, so you get a new customer as it goes.
Okay, Well, I was just going to say, like that's it. It's an interesting balance, isn't it? Because I could just imagine it like being lots and lots of low value customers going around. And then do you wait to brew the really special coffee for the high value customer, knowing that whilst you're waiting, everyone's picking up the lower value, customers.
You could balance up with sets. So for instance, if you get a set of like say three customers who will all ordering just a normal Americano, then yes, normally if you got just 3 customers, you would get 3 points. But if you collected obviously a set, every set's actually worth 4 points or 5 points instead. So yes, it's to make sure everybody's collecting all the smaller guys as well as getting kind of like the bigger guys. But you can also have kind of bonuses where you can introduce kind of new menu items or new ingredients as well, based on how simple or how more complicated you want the game.
You could have the oat milk expansion, couldn't you?
Exactly.
You'd also have to have the almond milk and the gluten-free oat
And
milk expansion as well.
Coconut milk.
Are we all taking notes on this, by the way?
Yeah. If I'd realised this, I would have brought my board game idea to the table as well.
Well, we can do. So what I've attempted to do there is actually say, and that's how you make a game that people will complain about your game, but that's how you make a game.
Mm-hmm.
Is effectively what we always try to do. And again, as promised, I will come back around to your original question.
Yeah.
What we always try to do as part of our process is we try to drill into the core DNA of what it is that we're trying to make.
Yeah.
Whether that's a licensed product, whether that's an actual game. So, and we'll use Resident Evil as the example because that's obviously one of the things you mentioned.
Yeah.
What is it that makes a Resident Evil game a Resident Evil game? Is it I'm blasting all the zombies I can see in sight and they're all just being gunned down and I'm basically feel like Zombie Rambo? Is it that's every so often one of my friends has to dive against the window, smash it to pieces, and then just start screaming at me? Maybe, but it's something where what makes a Resident Evil game feel different to to a Zombicide game to a game of, to a Left 4 Dead game? What makes it feel different to Silent Hill? What makes it feel different to any other type of survival horror or zombie experience that I'm playing? And once you start to understand what that is, you start to understand those key pillars that you can then return to time and time again and go, right, well, Resident Evil is a resource management game.
Yes.
Straight away, first core rule, you can't kill all the zombies. If you can kill all the zombies, then you're missing the point because you've got too much ammo. The whole thing is looking at this and saying, how am I going to get through this particular combat puzzle? Am I going to run past these zombies? Am I going to gun them down? If I gun them down, I'm using my ammunition resource to use too much of that, and I can't kill them later on, which might be okay, but probably not. I might need to get out of a pinch. But if I try to run past them, I might get bitten. So my health is my resource at that point, and my luck, effectively, how much I can, rely on that. And that's effectively what, one of the many pieces that falls into what a Resident Evil game is. And there are obviously several others in terms of tension and horror and all sorts of other bits, and according to that.
Yeah.
The more you get your game experience to be resonant with what you're trying to emulate, the less you have people, the more that you are better insulated from people who say, well, this doesn't feel like the game. Because ultimately, even though the mechanic may not be the same, even though it may work slightly differently to how it works in the video game, if the feeling of the game is the same, if it makes people, if it is evocative of people's favorite game, and that's why they sat down to play and they go, do you know what, this feels like Resident Evil, this is cool, I love this, then that's how you get a lot of positive sentiment with your game, and that's how you've done a good job of emulating, of simulating what that game is, even if you haven't necessarily simulated it on a one-to-one scale. And I think that insulates you quite a lot from when you do get people invariably who, aren't necessarily happy with what the product is that you've made, because irrespective of whether they enjoyed the experience or not, ultimately most of those people will still go, but you know what, you nailed it, it just wasn't for me.
Yeah,
and that's the key thing.
Horizon Zero Dawn, I think there was a lot of people that were expecting to have kind of like a 50-hour or 70-hour video game with kind of huge explorable kind of landscapes. But it was really funny because, like, if you read the kind of the rule book, it kind of actually explained kind of this is what this was where. And then when you got into that, it was like, yeah, this is, and when I wrote about it, that's what I said. It says, this is not people who are expecting the entire game are going to go, oh, this isn't the entire game. But people who are expecting to have the kind of gameplay strictly regarding taking on the different machines would have been kind of right at home. With regards to that, and slipping very slightly into Elden Ring, which I played tons and tons of the video game. I don't know if you played Elden Ring at all, much, Sam.
Of course, yes. Who hasn't?
Yes.
Come on.
This is when Sherwin says, no, I didn't have time to. I was too busy designing the bloody video.
Whenever I make any game, I spend hours playing. If it's an adaptation, I'll spend hours playing, or observe, picking up, like, they're not all obviously video games. Peaky Blinders, for example, I just sat there and watched a whole bunch of Peaky Blinders to get a feel for it. But the point is that whenever you're making any licensed product, you have to immerse yourself in the what it is.
The thing that strikes me that's interesting about adapting things like Elden Ring and Dark Souls and is those very singular experiences. And obviously, you work for Steamforged, they're a business, and you've got to attract customers and people to buy your games. So therefore, replicating that solo experience is, you're cutting out a big chunk of, the market who want to have a shared experience on the table. So I guess what I'm asking is like that those games, especially like Elden Ring and Demon Souls, which are all about that atmosphere of being alone, one person versus the many, like that is so much of the appeal of those games. So how do you sort of stop yourself from just saying, well, it's just a solo experience and that's it?
I think, it's a good question. I mean, I think as I sort of hinted at earlier, simulation works to a point. We don't ever want to get ourselves into a stage of saying, well, we do this exactly the way it works in the video game, because ultimately people will just go, well, I'll just go play the video game then. If
True.
that's what it is,
Yeah.
people sit down to experience games in various different ways for various different reasons. Some of our audience, they just love our games because they love the miniatures. They want to go get the various different. I know, for example, at the Elden Ring launch event, some people were just blown away by the miniatures. Like, hey, do you want a demo? No, I just want to come and look at Godric the Grafted.
Oh, really?
That's
Yeah.
really where I'm at. That sort of thing. And and that's fine. Like in all walks of life, people have different different ways of interacting with things. Some people are very tactile. Some people, and they want to kind of pick up all the models and go. They sit there rolling dice or building towers out of meeples or whatever else. Other people are much more focused on the rules and making sure everything is super clean and tight controlled that way. It's there's all completely different ways of approaching things as to why people sit down and play games. Just end of, not just our games. And I think something where one of the questions I always ask myself, like if again we'll go back to Elden Ring or Resident Evil or any of the games we've just mentioned, Horizon's another good example. Why do you play a tabletop game of this when you could be playing the video game? Now, part of that is obviously the social contract. It's nicer to sit down with your friends face to face and just play games with them.
Yeah.
That's kind of fun. Around the table, it feels more personable. But the other part is also, well, I can't play Horizon with other people. I can't play these games. Like, it literally, if I want to sit there, we can sit there and all just talk for the next 45 minutes about how awesome it was to play Elden Ring. But hey, do you want to go on? Do you remember that bit where we did the dungeon together? No, because we didn't do that, because we can't do that. Now, obviously, that does exist within Elden Ring to a limited way now, but when we first started talking about it, it very much didn't. And I think it's fair to say the majority of people who've played it, it's a solo experience.
And even then, you're not in the same room, are you? You're not. It's
exactly it. Yeah. So at that point, it's a new way to interact with your favorite game. Is the core thing. One of the big things that we had coming out of Resident Evil is a lot of people going, hey, I got to sit down and play this with my family. We all got to enjoy it together instead of just talking about how awesome it was watching someone playing this, or how awesome it was, that we all went away and played it all individually. We got to approach it in a completely different way. It still feels like Resident Evil because what we do and the way we move around and everything, but we got to work together to overcome what was being thrown at us, and people like that. That's a rewarding experience, and that in itself is probably the biggest driver to why you just go, do you know what, we should always have a solo mode, because there's a lot of people out there who want to play games and they want to solo it and so forth, but at the same time, adding in extra players is extra gameplay. That's extra kind of content that people really want, and board games and tabletop games, most of the traditional focus absolutely is playing with all of your friends.
Yeah. Do you think there's a danger with board games at the moment edging into becoming very, very complicated pieces with lots of moving bits that people end up just going, actually, it is easier if I just play. I wish there was a video game version of this. Because of recent, I have seen kind of big, huge games coming out. I mean, massive, huge behemoths, and we'll all know who they are. And they've got so many kind of moving, intricate parts that would actually probably be taken up by a bit of code in a video game. That I think sometimes you forget that the tabletop thing isn't about learning 20 million different rules and 20 million different mechanics and how everything kind of pieces together. But like your Resident Evil game, it is just a case of the zombies are always going to be moving. I don't need to roll individual dice for all the zombies. I don't need to understand their motivation. I don't need to give them names. I don't need to look at their individual hit points. All I know is they're coming towards me. I need to either run or fight.
You don't give names to your zombies?
I do,
Zombie
but I'm
1,
not going to publicly.
2. Zoe, Xander.
Right.
The cranberries.
But we've seen it.
They are. Zombies are people too.
Zombies were people too.
There's been a bit of that, Richard, though. In have you played Paperback Adventures?
I haven't. No.
So
I don't really play board games. I don't like them.
Fair enough.
I prefer speaking to people. You should have seen the face that Sherwin gives. It was like, you're lucky you're not you're lucky you're not near the office. Otherwise, I would run up and probably, I don't know, attack me with a Sharpie.
It'd be a long run to get to the office.
Yeah, you would.
Real quick. That's
About 4.5-hour drive away.
Exactly.
You've got a long way to
Exactly,
get away
exactly.
if I'm running up
I'll
to
tell
the
you,
office.
you name the place, I'll come and fight you. And it's like, well, let's go and try and fight some place where we're all going to get very tired before we decide we're going to actually have a fight. Anyway, you were saying, Sam.
But I was saying, like, you know, what you're saying about that complication and what video games do, which is really good in terms of streamlining a lot of the rules spaghetti in the back end. Like Paperback Adventures kind of, but like really challenges that in an interesting way. So it's a card game by Tim Fowers and Sky Larson, and the pitch of the game, I don't know if you've heard of it, Sherwin, is Slay the Spire, but crossed with Scrabble, and it's an attempt by both the designers to try and figure out how to bring a Slay the Spire kind of experience to the table. And you do that by battling different enemies, by spelling out words, and how you spell out words, you know, defines what kind of attacks you do, whether you do attacks or defense. And it's a really, really clever and smart piece of work. But there's a lot of like interface with what's going on the table. There's lots of rules and things that you have to fiddle with, and stats that you have to move up, and different ways that the game interacts with its items and its skill set means that there's kind of a lot to hold in your head at a time. But along with it, they also made a version of it that you can play on Steam, which does a lot of the sort of the complicated rule stuff in the background. And I've played it sometimes and thought I could just be sitting on my sofa and playing the video game version of this. Like, but there is just something. I don't know whether it's just because I'm a bit of a rules hound. Like, I read rule books in bed. Like, I'm notorious for it. But
It does.
But I'm a bit like, in my board game group, I'm the one who learns all the games. I'm the one who teaches them all. Like, just being very familiar with rules and applying it to something with a table is sometimes part of the fun. I find anyway. And, you know, when we played like Resident Evil, and that thought of like, you know, it's stuff like, you know, when you walk into a room and it's got the yellow or red hatching on it, and it's suddenly like, right, this isn't just a computer deciding this. This is a dice that we're all going to throw, and we're all going to witness, and we're all going to look on the chart together to see what's going to happen. And that is a lot more fun than just letting a computer do it, if you know what I mean.
There's an awful lot to unpack there, from the original question all the way through to that. But let's start on that last point you pointed out, because I like that. That's that's just really nice to hear, because that's something I worked really hard on Resident Evil to basically. The thing about Resident Evil is it's an immersive, the actual video game is an immersive experience.
Yeah.
It's something where you are scared, terrified of what's around the next corner.
Yeah.
The whole game is running from brief oasis of light to brief oasis of light, is the way of thinking of it. And you are running out of resources. And one of the things you realize is when you like get killed by something, you don't realize you've been holding your breath the entire time, because everything is this desperate battle to try and survive to get from this next point. And it isn't until kind of you maybe you get killed by a giant alligator or whatever, kind of you go, sink back into your chair and realize I've been holding my breath the entire time. I've been so immersed in this thing. My body is reacting to this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things we tried to do when we made the game was very much think about this as, how do we introduce that kind of level of psychology to people without it being a rule? Because one of the things we never want to do is burden people with too much complexity.
Yeah.
Whenever we design any game, we have something internally we kind of term complexity points. And if you make something really complex, like, we'll stick with Resident Evil. So the zombie reaction system is probably the most complex part about Resident Evil. That means that the player phase of that, as in the action phase where you're moving around, that needs to be super straightforward. And the tension phase, that needs to be super straightforward, because we spent all of our complexity points on the reaction phase. If you had a really complex action phase, then a really complex reaction phase, and a really complex tension phase, then everyone would find it impenetrable as a game, especially knowing that the audience primarily is a video game one. and those people may not traditionally be used to what a tabletop game is, because exactly as you've identified, they're used to a video game where a lot of the engine is doing stuff under the hood you never even see.
Yeah.
So one of the things we wanted to do is go, well, how do we introduce that? Well, one of it is the tension deck. You might know, I mean, I'll happily tell anybody that the breakup of cards in an average Resident Evil scenario is 70% green, 20% amber, and then 10% red. But that's numbers. The point is that when you're drawing that card, you are really scared you're going to draw a red card.
Yeah.
And even if you draw a green card, okay, but that just means I'm closer to a red card.
Closer to drawing red ones, yeah.
Right? Exactly. And as you start drawing it, and there's interesting things that we did with those as well. So for example, if you read the flavor text on it, there's some which, a dog howls in the distance, but you're okay for now. Three turns later, when a dog jumps through the window, there's emergent narrative there, because people make cognitive jumps. They're like, that's the dog, I heard it howling. It's obviously got nothing to do with reality. There's no timer that's applied by that card, but it's small triggers like that make people think of this. It's the ammunition dial when you're counting down. One of the purposeful things we talked about originally was we could have tokens to represent how many bullets you have, or you could write it down on a piece of paper, or you could track it with a dice or something. But no, actually picking up that dial and counting down the amount of bullets you're going to fire at that zombie is a physical action you're doing, and that makes you doubt yourself, because actually as that dial is going lower and lower, you're changing it down, and you're starting to go, okay, do I really want to spend this many bullets? I'm now starting to worry that I can physically see this thing going down. It's more tangible that way. It's exactly what you mentioned, going into that room and going, watching that dice bounce around and waiting for it to land, and go, what could it be from this horrific kind of menu of stuff that could be waiting for me? It's a 6. Means there's no enemies. Fantastic. Okay, we can move on. But it doesn't stop me worrying about what's going to happen next.
No.
Stuff like that. It's small details where these are things that won't ever appear in the rules, so they are effectively complexity light, but they're still very evocative of what that core experience is. The more wins you can get that way, the more it starts to feel like the game without necessarily needing to. So effectively, it's our engine that happens under the hood, just that we're relying on biomechanics to do it.
Yeah.
Are you a creative question? And I'm gonna try and be musical with this. Are you a guy who's got a lot of melodies, just looking to find the right kind of song lyrics, or do you kind of invent everything that comes up as a new thing? Do you have a book of mechanics for board games that when you get a new IP, you say, actually, we can maybe look at using this, or we can maybe look at using that? Or if somebody, say for instance, when Elden Ring did come up, I was, looking at it, there's possibly a lot of stuff that you could borrow from, like, Dark Souls and stuff like that. One of the major things was the exploration thing. Now, I was thinking, is that something that you had to start from scratch, or is there a Sherwin big book of board game notes that you go in and say, I'm going to look at this section and see what we can kind of pick from there?
So we never, and I can happily say this company-wide, none of our design team whenever we approach any new project, we always sit down and go, right, we're from scratch. We are working out. We always do the core DNA process I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
We always sit there, we identify what that is, and how the first step is always, so how do we make core DNA, what is establish the core DNA? What is it that makes this game this game?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now we've done that, or if it's our own licensed product, what do we want this game to be? And once we've identified those things, it's now, right, okay, so now let's think about mechanics. How can we create that feeling? And maybe we might have something where we've done it before and we go, oh yes, I could use a tension deck here to recreate that, for example, or I could do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
But we never have like a big book where we go, right, put down the idea in that. At some point we'll land on that and we can just bolt this in, we can just effectively, we can turn this into this. We never ever approach anything like a monopoly where we have a core engine and we just slap a label on top of it and that's it. We're not about skinning anything. And that's why we always want to build. As you can tell from where I'm talking about this, we're very passionate about. This is something where any game that we make is always, it's that game. It's specifically built for that game. It's entirely bespoke. We want it to be that way. We want it to be, we are far more respectful of what we actually get to work on and the games and our audience to what we internally call white boxing. I don't think that's the right term. It's something that we use, but it's something where we never want to just reskin an engine that we might already have to make something else.
Yeah.
We always want it to be very distinctly that. And yeah, and I think that generally tends to serve us quite well. In terms of that said, at any given time, Matt Hart, our creative director, and I mean, there's about 20 different games that we've got under the hood at some point where we've just gone, oh yeah, we should do this at some point.
Yeah.
Like, I travel quite a lot with Matt, either up to HQ or where we're going on a plane somewhere or whatever else. And when we're doing that, we're always like, oh, we could do a game around this, and we'll just bounce ideas off of each other and scribble them down a notebook somewhere. And at some point, we will get round to making any one of these many millions of games. But they won't be a reskinned thing. That will be like a whole Steamforged IP thing when we actually get the chance to actually do it. It's just a case of normally, as you've identified, we're quite busy. So it's something where we don't have time to kind of go, oh, yes, of course, let's make another 5. Yeah, let's make another 5 games this year.
Are there games that you're proud of that are out there and you've designed that you wish more people had eyes on?
I was good with you until you said the bit about you said something there that triggered my imposter syndrome, and I felt incredibly conceited for answering yes. I mean, obviously, the key thing is the answer is I would hope that people seem to like the games that Steamforged makes and I make, which is awesome and fantastic, and really really very appreciative of that. I would like, with that in mind, I'd like people to have more access to play games that good games that are fun as much as is humanly possible. I'd love for every Resident Evil person to sit down and play Resident Evil and go, love it, indifferent, hate it, whatever, have the experience of playing it, because it would be lovely to just give them the choice to do that. One of the things that's been the nicest part of my job that I've had, without any level of simply the nicest thing without any level of doubt, has been when I've actually spoken to people and they said, you know what, I didn't even know tabletop games were a thing, but I loved Resident Evil or I loved Horizon or whatever. I got into this because of that, and since then I've become a board gamer. Like, I now have a big board game collection of different games. I like play D&D, or I now I've discovered that actually Warhammer isn't a geeky thing, or whatever their poison is. They've discovered a whole new world. That's the most insanely rewarding thing I think I've ever been told by anybody, and that's lovely. So,
I mean, it was commented on George Lucas, and I think it was Steven Spielberg said that sometimes he wished Star Wars hadn't been successful because we probably missed out a whole cracking set of films that George Lucas would have done if he hadn't done with Star Wars. So if you weren't involved in so many of these kind of IP-based games, are we missing? Is there a hole again? Is there maybe a pile of... We're joking about the coffee cafe, the cafeteria game. But is there a pile of games out there that you would say, if I had... Is it like, are you going to get to age of 50 and instead of like building a boat or get a model railway, are you going to start creating the kind of Sherwin's range of games kind of thing? Is that...
I mean, maybe. It's not far off now, bless. But it's ultimately I get to make awesome games, irrespective of whether they're IP games or not. I mean, as I said, Matt and I have a hopper of games that we would love desperately to get around to making. We just never seem to have the bandwidth to do it. I would love to kind of sort of get around to those. The thing is, they keep growing every time we go traveling anywhere. Like, we'll just be trapped in in a box, whether that trapped in an air conditioned box, whether that's a car, a plane, or a train, or whatever. We'll just sit there and bounce ideas off of each other because we're both geeks who just love what we do. So a lot of the Steamforged. One of my sort of roles at Steamforged is lead design. So that means I generally tend to work with Matt at the very early stages of most of our games, but sort of concepting, proof of concept, early prototyping, that sort of stuff. And that as a result, our conversations always lead to, oh, do you know what I was playing the other day? This. You could do something similar in a game like X. Oh, that'd be cool. And then let's just run with that and see where we get to. I remember during one random design week that we had, I looked at a picture on a wall on a whiteboard and I was like, you could turn into a really interesting like Guitar Hero kind of vibe with that. Yeah, really? Yeah. So basically you have here's your cards here and you do this, and then when basically you have a timer deck going along here and you have to play cards into that, and that makes these different things and that scores you points. Half hour later we kind of go back, okay, cool, so we've we've basically gone through that. So now we've got that game in the hopper, and now let's go back to Elden Ring.
It's like
It's kind of how it rolls.
I'm gonna ask Sam a question. Okay, Sam,
Go on.
what kind of video game would you like seen turned into a board game?
Oh,
That's on the spot. That's mean.
It's not
That is
mean.
mean.
He does. It's not mean. I sent you the list of questions. I can't help it if you didn't pick them up. Oh wait, no,
There was a list of questions.
no, there was. Oh, oh wait. Oh no, it's in my drafts.
no,
Sorry.
you didn't send it. You fool. I mean, difficult one. That. I'd always thought, and I know this isn't a video game, but I've always thought the Three Musketeers would make a really great video game because it's quest based, and it reads. Considering when it was written, it reads like a video game. Basically, it's just 4 guys going out on fetch quests all the time, and 4 not very likable guys either. Don't believe what the Three Muskehounds try to.
I was saying, why aren't you doing Dogtanian? I mean,
Yeah, no. Don't believe what Dogtanian tried to teach you as a kid. So I always thought that would be quite an interesting cooperative experience to go on missions as the 3+1 musketeers with personalities affecting the gameplay in in certain ways and affecting things like combat and how you interact and all that kind of stuff. And I think the other thing that has been kind of the main sort of video games that I've been playing recently have been things like The Case of the Golden Idol and The Curse of Obra Dinn. And
Those game. Just want to love that game.
Yeah. And I don't know how there's the wonderful thing that Case of the Golden Idol does really well is that feeling of, slotting things in and completing a picture and that wonderful element of deduction where it makes you feel really, 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 really smart. And I think there's games that do that, but I feel like sometimes what board games slip into is actually making you feel like a bit of an idiot for missing things. So like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is a great case in point that it's a great game of deduction and reasoning, but at the end Sherlock just turns up and goes, I did that in 3 moves. What are you on about?
I couldn't get the box open for that.
whereas video games, in terms of that deduction, I feel like they just have a bit more of because part of the joy of that deduction is opening it up, looking at a case, closing it down and going to do something else, and then half an hour later you suddenly go, well, what if it's that? And then you come back and then you can just open it up and just. But when you're like the other day, we played Tragedy Looper from WizKids, formerly of Z-Man Games as well, and that's a really nice deductive game. Like it's really, I mean, it's like pure deduction. You go into that knowing absolutely nothing, and but you're under a time limit and you're under pressure, and the whole game is kind of against you. Whereas where Case of the Golden Idol does really well is the game's actually, we want you to make you feel smart. We want you to feel like a genius and to pick up on all these little things, and it encourages you to do that. And I think that's incredibly hard to do as a board game.
I guess my question is leading into, you've done Resi 3, when's Resi 4 hitting?
It's a good question.
Oh, come on. We've had a good 54 minutes of chatting, and I'm wondering.
It's straight back at you.
Would it hit back? Would it hit the same way as Resi 3?
How do you mean hit? Like, as in you pick up the box and if you were to hit someone, it does the same.
Well, I mean, any of the Steamforged range is like a hospital trip. I mean,
but Resi 3 is a really interesting case in point, I think, Sherwin, because and this is something that I wanted to ask you, was it difficult to make Resi 3 knowing that you were just iterating off Resi 2? Like, no, like stopping yourself from making big wholesale changes, like trusting the design, knowing that it was good enough.
Do you know, it's interesting because when we make a sequel to a game, we generally, back to that complexity points thing, we generally tend to go, most of our sequels will have 1.5 changes in them from the original version. Unless we want to make, obviously we'll always have case-by-case things, but if it was something where the audience received it very well, and Resident Evil 2 definitely had that, what are our 1.5 changes? What do we want to make to this that is more evocative of what the experience is, or makes it slightly better, polishes that? And it's something where zooming into that, I kind of part of it is the fact that Resident Evil 1 through 3, the video games, are all effectively the same engine, just with more polish added to it. They're extra animations, they're slightly smoother with the way they work and so forth. And there's no reason why our board game should be any different to the video game. Ultimately, it's the core engine. It's what people like. It's what seems to make it's what makes it tick, and it's what people seem to really sort of drill into and go, this actually is really good for the experience. So for me, the question wasn't, well, people like the action tension phase, that works well. So what do we want to address? Well, there's a few things. I want to make it so there's less setup time. I want to make it so that it feels like the tension deck evolves and the game adapts to you. I want to create an open world board game. That's small task. I want to create. I want to make a way of making the special attacks for the enemies feel more fluid and feel more elegant than what they were. So those are the sort of bits I drilled into. I mean, some of that is obviously more developer focused, kind of, how do I speed up setup time and so forth. But the other element was, how do I kind of went, well, that's probably kind of the bits to iterate on rather than core engine, since people seem to like that. And outside of telling slightly weird stories about how we ended up sort of coming up to those different ideas, that I think that gave me enough confidence when I was looking at RE3 of, actually, people really like this, and the video game had the same thing as well. It just built on what was already there before, so let's do the same. So that's a nice guiding light. So let's just look at our 1.5 changes. Let's not try to throw the baby out of the bathwater and completely reinvent it. It's ultimately a very similar game, and that's what we want to do.
Yeah, and I also remember, like, even in the video games, as Resident Evil changed, everybody absolutely loved 4, but then when they went into 5, people kind of went, "Oh no, we don't."
Yeah.
This is
and this is a key thing. If we were to make Resident Evil 4, that is a very different game to Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3.
It is.
So if I were to build an engine for Resident Evil 4, then what I would do is I'd very much look at this and go, right, so what's, back to the core DNA question, what's the core DNA of this game?
Yeah.
This is a more of a blasting, not zombies anymore, but I'm blasting enemies away. This is much more, if you were to look at Resident Evil 4, I'm going from one point to the next as a sort of a level progression. There's chapter ends, there's a merchant that I buy stuff off of. Ammunition is much more plentiful. There's a lot less survival horror element to it. There's much more of a combat puzzle. Effectively, if you're to think of the core Resident Evil 4 experience, I go from combat arena to combat arena, and there are objectives within that. First one, I need to survive. There's a man with a chainsaw running around trying to murder me and a whole bunch of other people. Yeah. I'm just trying to move around and not get killed until the time is up. Another area, Ashley's been grabbed. Someone's running off with her. This will mean nothing to people who haven't played Resident Evil 4, by the way, apologies. But someone's grabbed my partner. I need to protect them. Whether I've got a sniper rifle and I'm shooting enemies as they get close to her. These are effectively our combat puzzles that they just don't exist in the original Resident Evil series. But that's fine. That just means if we were to make a Resident Evil 4 game, that's the sort of stuff we would drill into instead. And that would therefore mean that we'd change the engine around.
And has working on any of these games, has it allowed you to have ultra geeky, geek out moments where you've kind of got emails from certain people, or you've been sent stuff, or even met people where you've just went, "Oh, I can't believe this is happening"?
Yes. So do you know that the most surreal moment I think ever happened was the original director for Resident Evil 2, sharing a tweet where he's like, "I've just got a copy of Resident Evil 2, the board game," and I'm like, mind blown. So you're literally kind of looking at this thing going, I loved your game a whole bunch of time ago, and this is why I'm doing my job. Like, this is why I got to make this game, and I played it to death. And now here's you saying, I really like playing this game. It's something I made. And then I'm just going, this is the most surreal day I think I've ever experienced in my entire life. But it's kind of cool.
That's incredible. Yeah.
Do you also have to have like moments where you're kind of like, you must be a really good secret keeper as well. I mean, you must be watertight and just walk in the house and go, what were you doing today? Can't talk to you, can't tell you. Do you have like kind of debrief moments, and you say you and Matt go on a lot of trips, where you sit there and you just like high five each other for 5 minutes and go, I can't believe that we're doing this kind of thing now that I'm not, and then you have to walk out the room knowing that you can't really tell many people until it's officially announced.
Yeah, like we knew about Elden Ring a long while before the world did, effectively. Matt and Rich especially, so the guys who own Steamforged, they were invited by Bandai and FromSoft to basically go and sit there and have a preview of it, and they couldn't even tell us about it for a long while, except for the part where Matt went, okay, something big is coming, and you guys, I desperately want to tell you, I can't right now, but it's going to be massive. Like, literally that, not us, just the world is going to change because this thing will happen and it's going to be amazing. And as soon as I can tell you, I am very excited to tell you all about it because we're going to make an awesome game. And as me going, okay, I have absolute trust in you. That sounds cool. Let me know when you can. And that's what it is. Like, part of one of the important things for us, obviously, is trust with our licensed partners.
Yes.
Where we work with them, and it is something where, again, as a lot of what I've said, that invariably means that we want our licensed partners to be able to trust us implicitly the same way as we trust them. Obviously, we tell them a whole bunch of stuff about how we work as a company and various type of different things. So yes, and I think a lot of that goes from a professionalism beyond the NDA, before the NDA. So it doesn't have to be like, yes, I'm under an NDA with a whole bunch of different companies. I can't talk about stuff that I actually work on, but at the same time, I wouldn't want to anyway because I have too much respect for them. So
yeah, and it ruined the surprise. It
was really interesting. It was really interesting talking to people about new forthcoming Resident Evil games when we were making 2 and 3 and so on. Everyone's going, "Oh, I wonder what this is like," and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I wonder too." It's like totally kind of just lying. So yeah.
How do you relax then? I mean, it's really because when I want to relax, podcasting actually allows me to relax. Sam, you relax by podcasting. Sherwin,
Sometimes.
Sherwin's the odd one out. Doesn't do that. How do you relax?
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to say. I mean, obviously, my hobby is my life and is my job. I generally tend to. So, I guess I mean I paint a lot of models. I find painting is extremely tranquil for me. I'll put on music or whatever else, and I'll just sit there and I'll paint, and that's something where I'll just lose hours and hours and hours because when I paint a model, I'm not just looking at it and going, oh well, this thing needs to be done, so I blast through it. For me, painting a model is storytelling. It is if I'm painting something for an army, I'm getting into the mentality of what is this thing I'm painting, what's its story, why is it here. I'm looking at every sort of part of it. Like at the moment I'm painting this giant model, right? So I'm looking at it and it's kind of its armor is a bunch of shields hanging off of it because no one makes armor for the size of this creature. So I'm looking at it, these things have been gifted to it by the tribes that are kind of coaxing it off to war to go fight for them or whatever else, or maybe it's killed these people and stolen them and put it on a bit of rope so it's got a bit of armor or whatever else. And as I'm painting the model, I'm kind of understanding that, and that influences the colors I paint for things, or whether I put blood stains on it, or various different bits and pieces. And that for me is like the part where I just have my escapism button switches and I'm done. So
do you paint, Sam? Have you ever taken up the brush?
I do have a copy of Blood Bowl that is still unpainted. I think I've painted about four miniatures, but when I have done it, I do find it is incredibly relaxing. and the process of it, and the detail, and the literal, as you're saying, Sherwin, you got the literal layers that you're putting on a model, but then there's also those those figurative, the metaphorical layers that you're kind of adding to it, where suddenly it's not a piece of plastic anymore. It's got a history to it. But for me, it's just finding that time to dedicate to painting. Something I'd like to do a lot more of.
I just started this week.
Did you?
Cool.
Literally last night.
What are you painting?
I'm painting. I got gifted by the lovely Andrew a little kill team set of ultramarines.
Ah,
So
nice. Are you painting them blue, or are you doing a different chapter?
I'm gonna do them purple because I'm a big fan of kind of like purple. So I'm going to I went into the hobby shop and I just went, set me up. I think it's like the Imperial Loyal people or whatever. I don't know. I don't know their names. I don't.
Are they
I'm
going to
not
be competition legal?
I don't care. They're going to be bright purple and beautiful. But yes, I primed.
Let's have a quick think. There's purple stars apparently. I'm just looking now.
I'll tell you.
All Claudes, that's who I'm thinking of.
I'll tell you. I'm going. This is going to make brilliant podcasting. But people, you're just going to have to, because this is out there. So I've got that. But they're not the Emperor's Children, because that's somebody else entirely.
They're naughty. They're naughty people.
Are they?
We don't talk about them.
Oh.
They used to be good guys, and now they're bad.
Ugh. Are they purple?
They are purple. They're very purple.
No.
They're so purple. They had to discover new colours of purple to make their armour purple.
Oh, because they look quite cool. Purple.
You can just make them bad guys.
Purple and gold. That's my colour
yeah.
scheme. So that's, so I went in and I got black primer, so they're all sprayed with a black primer. I'm then going to dry brush them with white to get some highlights. Mm-hmm. See, my problem is that I can't just go in and do something half-hearted.
No.
It's like, I think I'll write an article. Oh, actually, I'll go and get published in Tabletop Magazine. Which is available to buy. Please. Interview with Jamie Stegmaier. Thank you. But I just know that I'll kind of I'll not just be one coat and stuff like that. I'll be on YouTube videos and I'll be buying magnifying glasses and everything like that. But I used to draw quite a lot. And so I'm kind of interested to see how I can take things from kind of 2D to kind of 3D. So we'll see. But it's kind of interesting because I thought I've been meaning to paint for ages. So I'm just gonna try it out. So that's gonna be C. And I'll probably paint to them and then I'll forget about it.
Shameful. We will have to remind you. Yes. Sam and I now have a burden that we are going to chase you down.
Yeah. Welcome to the burden of painting.
I'm just going to get random. I'm going to random emails and it's like, oh, where's that email from? Oh, Steamforged, who's that? Oh, no, it's not. It's just a big banner saying, have you finished painting yet?
What we'll do is we'll start doing painting hangouts. Which you won't be familiar with, but what we'll do, it'll help inspire both of you to paint. So you basically just jump on a call like this, you don't record it or anything, you just sit there and paint models and hang out while you're doing it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna hang out with the designer of come on, it's bad, Yeah, okay, I'll do that. That sounds amazing to me. I'm totally up for that. What's next on the horizon for you? If you're looking between where the sun meets the sea. What's on the horizon for you next, Sherwin?
I don't know. There are always new horizons. I couldn't honestly say. At the moment I'm working on about 6 different projects. So at the moment, a lot of what I'm doing is finishing off bits and pieces. And obviously there's this thing called Elden Ring, which I'm working on quite frantically at the moment. Wow. It takes up a lot of my time. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Is there a long time on the Pledge Manager and stuff like that? Has that still got months to go before that down?
Pledge Managers are like the opposite of Kickstarters. Kickstarters are like this short burst of activity where everyone's very, very excited about doing this. And then Pledge Managers open and stay open for months on end, and they're very unsensational. They kind of just tick along in the background.
Get an email to say you've not completed your kind of Pledge Manager. What about you, Sam? What's on the horizon for you?
What's on the horizon for me? I am currently playing Hi-Fi Rush, which is an Ace video game, which is another thing that doesn't really translate well into board games, is rhythm action games. But you were hinting at a Guitar Hero one there, Sherwin, so maybe you've cracked it. What else is on the horizon? I've got my good friend Peter from the podcast sent me a copy of Troika the other day, so I think that is his next big ambition, is to run a game of Troika at some point, which would be good fun.
And when's the next Staying In podcast coming out?
When's this coming out?
I don't know. I've got to edit it and make me sound fantastic and wonderful, which is going to be
episodes are released on the 1st and the 15th of every month.
So there you go. And for those who haven't listened to Staying In podcast, it's an absolutely fabulous, wonderful podcast, which is all about various kind of lovely you could say, it's going to say geeky things, but it's not. It's about mainstream popular hobbies and entertainment. So it talks about films, it talks about board games, it talks about Resident Evil, and you can check it out. It's hosted. I was going to make sure it's hosted by Dan, and the reason I'm saying that is because the last time I spoke about who was on it, I completely forgot to say Dan. That was years ago, and he has forgiven me. But it's Dan, it's Chris, it's Pete, and it's Sam, and they do a kind of a wonderful thing. So that's worthwhile checking out. We'll put the notes in the show notes. If people want to keep an eye on what you're up to in the internet webs, Sherwin, where can you find you on the internet webs?
There's an SFG Discord, which you can jump in, and I chat to people quite a lot. Alternatively, you can find me on Twitter at Sherwin's Agenda, and then in our Facebook groups for various different things we have. So Dark Souls, Horizon, Bardsong, Resident Evil, those are my normal stomping grounds.
And again,
awesome.
we will put links in the show notes so that we have notes to show. If you want to see what we are up to, just jump onto the internet webs and search for We're Not Wizards. You will find me in the internet. You'll find me in print. Did I mention I'm in Tabletop Gaming Magazine? Which is available. I also do an article about why online rulebooks aren't good. So you can check that out. You can go to all those different places. And if you've listened to it along tonight, then do a couple of things. Go and check out Staying In podcast and listen to them and give them a rating or a review. And if you are going to be giving them a rating or a review, don't give them 10 stars on the old Apple podcasts, because they're lovely, but I don't want them to be big-headed. But at the same time, don't give my friends 1 star, otherwise I will hunt you down like the dog you are. Give them something in the middle, like a 5, because they're average. But not average. But the person who's not been average tonight, it's rather wonderful, rather fantastic, Mr. Sam Turner. Thank you for coming on, Sam. The absolutely amazing, the inventive, the fantastical, the man who has cardboard coming through his veins. That sounds a bit weird. Look at the eyebrows are going all over the place. It's Sherwin Matthews. Thank you, Sherwin, for guesting again.
Well, thank you for that wonderful sign-off. It's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me.
Well, if we wait till after 9 o'clock, we get nicer. But there's only 2 more things to do. I need to go. I'm on a yellow and I'm coming down. The first thing is to remember that we're many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Sam?
No.
Are we wizards, Sherwin?
I don't believe so.
Good. And the second thing is to say goodbye. So it's a goodbye from Sam. Say goodbye, Sam.
Goodbye, Sam.
And it's a goodbye from Sherwin. Say goodbye, Sherwin.
Goodbye, Sherwin.
And it's a goodbye from me. Remember, stay safe, roll 6s, make something awful, and until the next time,
A wizard
stay
is
in,
never
stay Steamforged. Bye.
is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.